Niels Bohr once said that it's very hard to make predictions, especially about the future. But that's exactly what we're going to do today. Hello, I'm Dr. Sam. This is Dr. Sam's Health. Today we're going to continue talking about the war in Ukraine, and we will keep doing so until this war is over, of course. I have quite a few things that I would like to mention to talk about. We already spoke about the history of Ukraine and this war, all the factors that led to it. We spoke about the goals of this special military operation and how the conflict or war actually evolved. And right now, I think we're ready to talk about something even more important. Specifically, what should we expect to happen in the next months or years? How long will this conflict last? And what will be the ultimate outcomes of this war? As always, I'll make my regular disclaimers. First of all, I'm a medical doctor, I'm a psychiatrist, but I'm not giving any kind of medical advice over internet. I'm not doing any of that here. Anything that I express are just solely my opinion. I'm making these videos for solely educational purposes, and my opinions do not necessarily represent the opinions of my governing bodies, my colleges, universities, and so on, and my specialty, actually. At times, actually, I'm not even sure if my opinions represent the opinions of all Ukrainians, and that's actually a special disclaimer for this kind of videos, which is, I lived in Ukraine for 28 years, then I came to Canada, and I lived there here since. I think I'm kind of an expert in Ukraine and Ukrainian-Russian relationships. So obviously, there are quite a few things that I missed for a variety of reasons, but I do speak the language, I do know the territory, I know the history, and in general, I feel that I'm well equipped to talk about these subjects. So the disclaimers are done. Let's talk about the war. The outcomes. Actually, quite a few people ask me, Andrei, what do you think? What's going to happen? Will Ukraine win this war? Will Russia win this war? What will happen to Donbass area, to other occupied areas? What will happen to Crimea? And I must say that it's actually very hard to make a prediction here, just because there are so many different scenarios that are more or less likely to occur. And I will talk about these scenarios, and then I will show you how I try to operationalize things. There is a spectrum of options. One of them is, say, something happens to Putin, and that's the most optimistic and enthusiastic scenario. And I'm not talking about, necessarily him being killed by his surroundings, by his entourage, by the oligarchs who are, I'm pretty sure, very unhappy with what is happening in Russia and with the state of Russia's economy, their banking accounts, the yachts and villas been seized by international authorities. I'm talking about potentially him coming to senses and stopping this war, or maybe he can be removed by a coup, or maybe he dies or gets incapacitated by some natural causes. This is a quite unlikely scenario, but I honestly was hoping that he would be removed from the power, and that would allow his essentially cronies to actually distantiate from him and say, you know what, this war was clearly a huge mistake. We're very sorry for that. We have nothing to do with this. We're under the oppressor, and now we can kind of pedal everything back. We'll remove the troops from Ukraine, and we will sign all kinds of treaties. Essentially, they would capitulate without his influence. I think that it's a very unlikely scenario, but at the same time, it does exist. There is another scenario, again, that Russia realizes that this war cost them too much, and I think that all the efforts that the whole world is making to stop this war are directed in this, specifically in hope that this scenario will play out. They are implementing newer and newer sanctions. They are arresting the accounts of oligarchs. They're making Russian businessmen and women quite uncomfortable outside of Russian environment, and hopefully that all this pressure plus all the losses that they suffered in Ukraine will show that that's time for them to cut their losses, and they will just stop, they will retreat, and likely there will be some sort of a, well, not likely, definitely there will be a peace treaty, but likely there will be some negotiation about Crimea, about the territories that they have already occupied, things like that. This scenario is actually, I think, is still less likely than the next one, but I think it's to a certain extent probable. I would give it like maybe 5-10%. The previous scenario, when Putin gets eliminated, maybe it's like less than 1%. The next scenario is pretty much the main scenario that I think that is most likely to happen, which is Ukraine fights back for an extended period of time. Russians cannot retreat just because it will mean that they would accept the defeat and the huge geopolitical failure of this regime, and they literally cannot backtrack at this point. They cannot stop. They will keep shelling Ukrainian cities, sending rockets, sending troops, mobilizing some troops. They have lots of resources, and that will be a very exhaustion kind of war. So there will be one military power, Russian military power, versus Ukrainians, supported by the rest of the world. And this scenario is actually very likely, but at the same time, the actual outcomes of this scenario, they really depend on the amount of resources Russians have and are willing to continue investing into this conflict, war, and the amount of resources that the world is offering, and obviously the pressure from the world. So at a certain point, this scenario can transition to scenario 2, when Russians realize that it's they literally have to cut their losses. And ultimately, there is the most pessimistic scenario. Something happens and Ukrainians give up, and they capitulate, and they sign some sort of a very terrible peace treaty with Russians, when they say, you know what, we withdraw our troops, we will let you have the territories that you have already occupied, and they literally will give up. I don't think this scenario is really likely, just because, you know, Ukraine, first of all, has shown that it can defend itself, and there is a lot of international support, and also, unfortunately, Ukrainians as a nation have suffered huge losses. Tens of thousands of people are dead, millions of people have relocated, hundreds of thousands of people have lost their, likely millions, have lost their livelihood, and at this point, Ukraine is unanimously hating Russia to the point that accepting this kind of scenario would be a terrible defeat for the nation, and I would say that that would be something that would completely kind of negate the whole concept of Ukraine being a nation. So we've got like 4 scenarios. They are on the spectrum from the most optimistic one, but unlikely, to the most pessimistic one, also unlikely, to something in the middle that is very likely to happen. But again, there are different sub-variants of that. So how can I possibly answer the question about Ukraine, Ukrainians, what's going to happen to the country, to our people as a result of this war, given that we've got very different scenarios, the whole spectrum of them occurring or possibly occurring? The answer, again, is it's very difficult to predict and to give one answer to this question, but I think it's an opportunity for me to put on my scientist hat and try to use some knowledge in statistics and probability theory to answer it. So in research or in science, every time we're having a situation, we've got some event that might have different outcomes, and usually these outcomes are quantifiable, we come up with something that's called expected value. The idea is that each of these outcomes can be quantified and it has its probability. And what we do, we just multiply the outcome by its probability and add them up. And as a result, we get something that's called expected value of this event. And I think the best way of explaining it would be just giving an example. Actually, one of the best examples would be a lottery. So say there is a lottery, there is 1 million tickets sold. The main prize is, say, $500,000, and the price of one ticket is $1. Obviously, if I were just a regular person, I would buy a ticket and I would not expect, but I would hope to win $500,000. That's the whole point of this idea or event for me, right? But as a statistician or scientist, what we would do, we would calculate the expected value of this event, which would be, we would take a look at two possible outcomes. One of them is you're winning $500,000 or you are not winning $500,000. And they have different probabilities. So there is 1 in a million chance that you would win $500,000. And you would also have 999,999 chances out of million to win exactly zero. If we calculate the expected value of this event, it would be 50 cents or $0.5. So when you are, for a statistician, if you are buying a lottery ticket, you are expecting, if you're doing multiple times, to get on average 50 cents. So it's a quite frankly a terrible outcome, and as a statistician I would never recommend playing lotteries. But I think it's a great example of what expected value is, and we can apply it to the situation of war in Ukraine. So if we consider all possible scenarios, or the ones that I have just described, and their probabilities, I think that the expected value of this conflict would be, first of all, that it will last likely somewhere between several months to a couple of years. So let's say between 6 months and 24 months. Likely in terms of human capital, human losses, both sides will keep losing people. And it's a terrible tragedy. We will keep losing tens of thousands of people from both sides. And that obviously, right now I'm talking about the military personnel, but there will be obviously losses of thousands of civilian lives, which is again a huge tragedy. There will still be hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, who will lose their livelihood, their homes. There will be a huge impact on the economy of both countries and the world in general. In terms of territories, I think that it's very likely that the average outcome will be that Russia will keep Donbas region, like Donetsk and Luhansk. Maybe they will assimilate or occupy a couple of more regions, but I would say that the expected outcome is that these two areas will not return to Ukraine. Unfortunately, as much as I hate this idea, likely people would ask me about Crimea, and I think that it's a binary outcome. Crimea either rejoins Ukraine or stays with Russia, and I think that the expected outcome here would be the Crimea would stay with Russia, and that is pretty much my prediction. I would like to quote Niels Bohr. I love this scientist. He once said that it's very hard to make predictions, especially about the future. And I think he was very right. And at the same time, that's what I'm trying to do here. And that is pretty much everything I want to talk about. I, again, would like to say that I hope that this war will end tomorrow, that tomorrow we'll all wake up with a clear sky over our heads. I'm talking about Ukrainians. And there will be no mention of this war, and the country can return to a normal, peaceful life, rebuilding and restarting normal lives. I am afraid that, according to my own prediction, that's not what's going to happen, and it's very unfortunate. So I think it's everything I wanted to say today. Again, I expect that not everybody will like what I had to say, but that is my semi-scientific, semi-personal opinion. And I would appreciate if, no matter what you think about my videos, you help me promote them. Help me make them visible, because the whole idea of me making these videos is just to make sure that vast numbers of people who live in all over the world and speak English and watch the Anglophone or English segment of YouTube, they can get more or less unbiased opinion on in terms of what is happening in Ukraine, first of all, and second, I don't want this conflict to be forgotten. I can already tell that there are much more different things that are in the air these days. People are talking about all kinds of things, and people are not talking about Ukraine as much as they used to. And I think that Ukrainians and Ukraine as a nation, as a country, it requires this attention from from all people of the world, so that it keeps receiving support from the West to help fighting of Russian invasion. So please hit the like button, subscribe to my YouTube channel, check out my website, drsamshealth.com. Hopefully in a couple of months things will get a little bit better and I'll be able to talk about nutrition science and so on. Please leave comments, share this video with your friends, colleagues, whoever you like. Ask questions. I'm always happy to interact with you. Once again, thank you so much. I hope that this war will end as soon as possible, and I wish you all the very, very best. I'll see you soon.